There's always a better way to do what you're doing right now. So be grateful. Now they're just like, oh my gosh, there's so much more to do, right? And I was like, no, programmatic is where my heart is. Amen. Myles is going to talk to us about data privacy, where we stand as an industry. We're going to talk about, it's all related if you think about it, identity and also like data clean rooms, which are maybe 3 topics that have been really heavy on my shoulders. Like, what are they? What's going on in this world? I'm so excited to talk about Myles. But Myles, before we get into today's conversation, how about you give us like a good 2-3 minutes introduction about yourself, who you are, where you're from, and really like how you got started in the industry.
Yeah, it's tough to pack that into 2 or 3 minutes, but so I joined
3 minutes and a half. We'll give you
I joined U of Digital around 5.5 months ago, I think, at this point. And I had met Shiv a good 1.5 to 2 years prior to that. We basically met over Twitter. Ellen, you and I were just talking about the power of kind of Twitter and making connections that way.
Y'all shouldn't slip on Twitter, at least for networking. Now advertising, I don't know,
And so prior to U of Digital, I was at an agency called Media Monks. So Media Monks is a global digital agency. It is the one that Sir Martin Sorrell founded after he left WPP. So I was there for about 5 years. I ended up at Media Monks via an acquisition. I was at a smaller programmatic consultancy called Mighty Hive.
Oh, cool.
And prior to that, I was an ad tech founder for around 10 years. So built and ran a small DCO platform called Can Banners, which gave me a peek behind the curtain as to how you build and run an ad tech company. And then going back even further than that, I started my career on the client side doing B2B marketing at a number of different companies. And I currently live in Portland, Oregon, originally from San Francisco. That's where I grew up.
Cool, very cool. So so you started in B2B marketing account management, you said?
Just B2B marketing, just corporate marketing.
Gotcha.
I did all kinds of things. I did emails, I did events, I did product marketing, all of it.
What made you shift into programmatic or ad tech?
I essentially fell into it. Like, I didn't know that I was getting into ad tech. I had an idea for a company to start around display ad creative, so digital display ad creative. And I found 2 friends who were willing to, sort of launch the company with me. And we didn't know it at the time, but we were building an ad tech company. And so this was back in 2008 when we first got started. So ad tech was a category that was known only to a very few people in the Bay Area and New York. There was no broader news coverage of the sector. Ad Exchanger was the only newsletter that had any coverage of it. And Ad Exchanger was just run by John, I'm blanking on his last name right now. But anyway, the original founder of Ad Exchanger. Yeah, so it was, we didn't know we were getting into ad tech. I didn't realize it until years later.
They trapped you. Now you're stuck.
I know. Well, I enjoyed it very much. No, I never looked back. Now that I'm in ad tech, I never want to leave.
Right. It'd be like that sometime. I can relate. Cool. So I asked all of this question to all of the guests that comes by before our conversation. Is like, what would be your definition of programmatic industry to a 5-year-old? But let me just give you another question. Like, how would you define the advertising technology industry to a 5-year-old?
Oh man, this is great. My oldest daughter is much older than 5 now, but I have been explaining to her in bits and pieces what I do for a long time. And so,
kids these days are smarter.
Very
Smarter-ish.
Very,
than before. So
yes. No, she's extremely sharp, and
oh, for sure.
she has a pretty good understanding of with digital media, I guess. So let's see, how would I explain programmatic to a 5-year-old? I would say that it is like if you have a product that you want to sell, and you want to run advertisements about that product so that people are aware of it, so that they'll want to buy it. Programmatic advertising is like a robot that you give instructions to, and you say, hey, can you go find me some people who might be interested in this thing, and show them these ads, and hopefully they'll visit my store, they'll visit my website, whatever, and they'll buy this product. That's more or less probably how I would describe it to a little kid.
Okay, that's a really good way to break it down. So now explain data privacy to a 5-year-old. I'm kidding. Well, you can start, and then let's really get into it, because
I mean, you really do have me thinking as to whether I have ever explained that specifically to my daughter. I mean, we do talk to her about, being safe online, things like that, of like, hey, look, there's a lot of people out there who want to know things about you, and essentially you don't know their intentions.
Yeah.
Because it's the internet. They may or may not be who they say they are. So you have no way of knowing their intentions. And so, protecting yourself is important, and that's essentially another way of kind of defining, privacy, quote unquote.
Yeah. And so, okay, so let's segue into the conversation today then, because I think that's a good way to explain this. There's a lot of shit happening with data privacy, and I'm the first one to admit, is like, I can't keep up with everything. I think the latest and the greatest I paid attention to was when Google, the DOJ thing, right? So, so if you had to tell us, the listeners, the community, anybody out here in these streets, what they should know about data privacy when it comes to the ad tech industry, like what's going on, first of all, and then why is it so important for us to know it?
So in terms of explaining it from a really high level, I wrote a piece for Mobile Dev Memo in late 2021, I think, called, I think the title was "Digital Privacy is Now an Unstoppable Three-Body Problem." And the title comes from the three-body problem, which is essentially kind of a physics problem. When you have three bodies orbiting each other in space, if you have two bodies orbiting each other, or one orbiting around the other, like the Earth orbiting around the sun, it's very predictable. The motions of the bodies are very predictable. If you add a third one into that, so there's three different bodies orbiting one another, it becomes impossible to predict over the long term. Say, well, where would these bodies be in 100 years, in 1,000 years, in 100,000 years? It's impossible to predict, and that's what's going on with digital privacy. And then the three bodies, broadly, if I'm recalling my own thing correctly, is government regulation is one of them. Public opinion is another one. And the third one is tech platforms just making changes. So whatever, Apple's Safari ITP would be like or Google, deprecating third-party cookies in Chrome would be a technological change. Right. Okay. And so we remain in a state where at any given time, any one of those, there could be a major change in any one of those three categories that could completely turn everything upside down. So even if, for instance, the technology piece of things settles down, that doesn't mean that, for instance, we might not get federal privacy legislation, next month or something, that completely, turns everything upside down. So like that's how I explain what's going on, like at an extremely high level. It's just you can't predict it, and so don't try. And so then it becomes a question of kind of like, I think figuring out which parts of it seem to be getting more, at least reaching some point of like stability. Which, you pointed out like data clean rooms, which you can talk about, which it seems to be like that's, as a technology, it's gaining general acceptance. And I think the other thing, if you dig further behind that, the fact that that's gaining general acceptance is that what's also just gaining general acceptance is that third-party cookies are dying, mobile ad IDs are kind of dying, or they're just not going to work as well as they used to. Like, that was something 2 or 3 years in the past, there wasn't necessarily this general acceptance around. But now there seems to be at least that general acceptance. Everybody's accepted this is happening.
Mm-hmm.
And so now you're seeing a lot of tech platforms and companies kind of aligning around, something like data clean rooms.
Got it. Okay. So before we get into data clean rooms, what is one thing we really need to understand about data privacy aside from you gotta accept that things are happening, okay? What is one thing, or what's like the latest news that came out? I mean, I'm not gonna hold you against it if you don't know, but like, what's the latest thing you've heard from on that topic that made you think, this is important because this?
The Web3 as a topic seems to have kind of died down, but one of the things that I found interesting about Web3 is the idea that anonymity would just start to be built into things at a very fundamental level. It wouldn't just be like a setting in your browser or something like that. It would be much more fundamental than that, you could essentially have a digital life and have it be sort of protected in the same way that your life in the real world is protected in terms of privacy. And I think that's a thing that's one of, to me, the things that's kind of like, again, this gets back to the whole 3-body problem, and you can't really predict what's going to happen, is that ad tech, a lot of ad tech is kind of predicated on the assumption that a lot of consumers, first of all, they're going to be on Web 2. So it just assumes that they're going to be on Web 2, and maybe they won't be forever. Maybe new technologies will kind of take over, and then there's also other technologies like, for instance, Apple's like hide my email, which totally even blows up a lot of clean room use cases. So if you have too many people using anonymized emails, then those emails don't resolve to anyone. And so that to me is like one of the, things that's kind of like lurking under the surface, is that we don't really know how web technology is going to evolve over the next couple of years, and whether or not it is going to have increasing layers of anonymity built right into it directly.
So real quick, because you talk about Web 2 and Web 3, so I think I forgot. What's the difference between the two?
I mean, Web 3 has like this really, really big giant definition, but because
nothing new in our industry, unfortunately.
Yeah,
right?
People jam everything under Web 3, and
Right.
I'm not like a Web 3 guy. They put like the metaverse into it.
Okay. Now I remember. So Web 3, the easiest way to understand is like metaverse stuff, and then Web 2 is the rest of us, I guess.
Well, so
kind of.
If we think back to, and I don't know how old everybody is on this call, but like
we are very wise.
I'm old enough to remember, maybe some other people on this call old enough to remember the shift from Web 1, quote unquote, to Web 2. It was a very like kind of specific shift, and it was very visible to just an everyday person, because for instance, all of a sudden, you remember a really long time ago, if you were using an online maps service, like I think Yahoo had a map service, you would have to click a little arrow. MapQuest, you have to click a little arrow to move around the map, right? It was like 4 arrows. It was really, really clunky by today's standards. And then all of a sudden, Web 2 came along, and suddenly you could just smoothly travel around the map.
I see.
And the map had an API that could integrate with other data sources. So if you got, for instance, a file or an API that would tell you the location of every coffee shop in your city, you could then plot those locations onto a map and be able to explore and interact with that map in real time online. So this is not a computer program running on your computer. This was something you were able to access via your web browser.
Yeah. So
that was like Web 2. And so Web 2, the assumption was that everything was going to travel over these open APIs. Like, you remember, like Twitter had a much more open set of APIs. Facebook, all the social platforms had much more open APIs, 15 years ago, because that was the assumption. And so included in that was that consumer data could travel openly over web APIs. Like, your consumer information via a third-party cookie ID could be grabbed off of any website that you were browsing. It could be synced with any other data set via an API call in real time as you're browsing a CNN or something like that. And that was all built on Web 2 principles. So a lot of like the privacy challenges that, we're kind of grappling with today and things that are needing to be unwound come straight from this Web 2 revolution that happened, like, at this point, 15, almost 20 years ago. So it's that, and that's why I say that we all assume that that's how the internet has to work. But that's not how Web 1 worked. That was how Web 2 worked, and Web 3 may work pretty different.
When you talked about MapQuest, the only thing I can think about is like, y'all remember the days where we had to print?
Yes.
Print directions.
Yeah.
How many? Like, okay, I'm only 33, but like I remember specifically these days when we had to print MapQuest and then go.
Oh yeah, I remember driving around with big stacks of black and white printouts.
We went from Virginia to Boston on MapQuest, Virginia to like freaking Miami on MapQuest. Those were good old days, I guess. If you can call it that. But okay, so let's shift. Okay, so I think it's a good way to continue the conversation too, because one of the reasons why we started talking about identity or whatever that is, or signal lost, is because data privacy is pushing big tech giant like Google, or those other giants to really reconfigure how we're tracking things like audience, right? And that's when you talked about the third-party cookie. So I had a question from the community here, and I think it's a really great question, because when you said that the industry is accepting that third-party cookie is going away, I almost said, is it really, or is it not really? But then this person asked, is Google really getting off third-party cookies, or just trying to change the meaning of third-party cookies? And it got me thinking. So how would you answer this question?
I kind of like the notion that Google might simply change the definition. But keep the technology intact. I actually won't. That's not a bad idea, and I won't argue against that. That seems almost plausible.
We can only talk so much junk about Google, y'all. Okay, they're listening.
I actually am one of the people who will talk the least junk about them. I'm probably among the most sympathetic people to Google in the industry, and every now and then I get sort of virtual tomatoes thrown at me because
hate mail coming to you.
I think they'll deprecate third-party cookies. This is another. Okay, I'm going to keep referencing my three body problem thing. So I'm sorry to be a broken record on that one. But for instance, if the DOJ is successful in breaking up some of Google's advertising and media empire, in whatever way that might happen, it could take a lot of different forms.
Yeah.
What might that mean for the Chrome browser? So, setting aside the question of whether Google has to divest its Chrome browser or not, if, for instance, Google has to divest all of its buy-side ad tech. Now, this is just me. I'm in an armchair just thinking about this. I could be completely wrong here, but if I'm on the Chrome team, I run a web browser. I don't run an advertising technology company. I'm building a web browser for people who want to browse the web. I might just completely ditch a lot of the privacy sandbox stuff and say this has, really no place in Chrome. We just need to get Chrome to parity with Safari and Firefox and what's Microsoft Edge? Is that what they call it now?
Yeah.
It's not Internet Explorer. I think it's Edge now.
Yeah.
I have it on this computer. It shows how little I use it.
Yeah, I only do Chrome and Safari.
Yeah,
and I only do Safari when Chrome isn't working the way I want them to work. That's it.
I think it's entirely possible that major components of, for instance, the Privacy Sandbox project, which is kind of the thing, that's the thing standing in the way of them deprecating third-party cookies. They could have already deprecated third-party cookies, like Firefox already did it. Safari already did it. I can't remember exactly where Edge stands today, but I'm pretty sure they're like, they've deprecated or they're close to it. That's not what's standing in Chrome's way. What's standing in Chrome's way is Privacy Sandbox. And so if you take away the need for them to build Privacy Sandbox, which they've been investing a lot of effort into for well over 3 years now, if you take that away, why couldn't they just set a 6 or 12-month timeline and say, yep, we're deprecating them, like, get used to it. That's going to make Chrome no different than the other browsers. It's not even that actually support for third-party cookies currently makes Chrome abnormal. Like it makes it not normal. So deprecating third-party cookies, it is actually what would bring Chrome back into normalcy with the other browsers.
Why? I didn't follow. Why is it not normal? Why is it abnormal? Okay.
It's the only browser that still supports them by default.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That I did not know. That's interesting.
Yeah. Every other browser has decided on this, and they have decided to step away from third-party cookies.
And so when you throw into the mix things like data clean rooms, right? First of all, give us your 5-year-old definition of data clean room.
Oh man.
And then again, I'm excited about data clean rooms based on what I've learned actually at Projo last May in Vegas. But give us your quick definition and why it's important here.
So my data clean room definition for 5-year-olds isn't actually for a 5-year-old, but it's like, this is my
15-year-old. Yeah, that's just.
This is my plain English definition.
Okay.
So my sort of quasi-technical definition of a data clean room is to allow, say, a marketer to work with a data set, to employ a data set, data about people, without having to directly touch that data or interact or access that data directly, but they can still perform work on that data. And so that's a, kind of a nuanced distinction of how do I work on data without accessing the data. So this is my example to kind of like just explain how that's possible. Let's say that I am a contractor working at a large company. So I don't work for that large company. They just brought me as a contractor to maybe do some analytics or something like that.
Okay.
And Ellen, let's say you work at the company, you work in the HR department at that company.
All right.
And I've been hired to analyze people's salaries. And so I go to, and so as a contractor, your company, Ellen, is not going to give me direct access to HR data. They're just like, you don't have clearance to access our HR data directly.
That's true.
So, somebody, asks me to run an analysis and say, well, we want to know how many people earn over $100,000 in the Western region. And we just need you to run those analytics. So I go to you, Ellen, who you work for the company and you work in the HR department. I say, Ellen, I need to know how many people make over $100,000 in the Western region. Can you give that, can you give me that number? Because I need to run it's part of a project. And so you go access the database and you run that query in the database and you give me the number, and maybe the number is 1,000 people.
Mhm.
And you say, okay, Myles, here, it's 1,000 people. And I say, thank you. That's all I needed to know. And so in that analogy, you're the data clean room, Ellen.
Mhm.
You're allowing me to perform work on employee data without ever accessing the employee data, meaning I got the answer I wanted, but I never had to directly access that data, never had to access anybody's salary information. All you told me was the summary answer that I needed was it was 1,000 people, Myles. Great.
Mm.
So that's kind of my
That's good.
like super plain English definition.
Yeah, that's good. So okay, so something that trips me up or get me lost is when you hear big brands, right? Those 7 to 8 figure brands that in terms of data, I mean, in terms of budget spend, of course, talking about sharing a data clean room. Why is that another form? Is that like second party data 2.0 maybe with data clean room, when you hear like Target and Walmart saying we're going to share a clean room because we can't afford one by ourselves or something like that?
So I think data clean rooms and sort of second party data collaboration or second party data activation, essentially anything having to do with second party data,
Mhm.
which for everybody's benefit, second party data, at least the definition I always use is it's someone else's first party data.
Yeah.
So it's someone's first party data. It's just not yours. It's your partner's first party data. Anything having to do with second party data these days is by default, you just might as well assume it's going to use a data clean room. And
Yeah.
even if you take away all technological considerations, there's all the legal and IT security considerations
Mhm.
that like you just, now that data clean rooms are kind of an industry standard sort of technology, there would be no reason that, you know, a company, you know, corporate counsel or a CIO, CTO is going to allow a company's first party data to be shared without there being a data clean room there to ensure data security, essentially.
Mm.
Hi, did you know that at Ellen Parker Consulting, we now offer an accelerator program where we attract, recruit, and train future marketers? And their training include a 6 weeks program where they cover programmatic landscape, important industry trends, the differences between targeting placement and targeting mix, and their best practices, including optimization and reporting hacks. And they're able to set up, manage, and monitor a campaign, a demo campaign in the trade desk, everything including audience selection, inventory optimization, SPO, creative upload, brand safety, you name it. They're able to do it at the end of the 6 weeks program. So if you are part of the 90% of employers struggling to find a skilled candidate today and not willing to spend $14,900 on a bad hire, according to Zipia, give us a call. Let's discuss which one of our 5 to 10 juniors available every month is the perfect fit for your team. Clients who have hired our juniors have shared that we were able to help them save 1 to 2 months onboarding with those juniors. Give us a call right now and let's discuss the solution with you.
Do you know what data clean room reminds me of? Like almost like this more secure data provider. You know, like when you log into your DMP, you have Experian, Bambura, Blue Kai, you name it. Here's $1 million question. I know you're asking us not to ask for prediction because we can't predict, but do you think eventually data clean rooms is going to catch on so much more that a data provider itself, like a DMP, is going to become obsolete?
I mean, a DMP, like the classic DMP use case, which was, you know, a means for a marketer or an agency, just somebody on the buy side, to manage and segment and suppress audiences that were defined by third-party cookie pools. Like once Chrome deprecates third-party cookies, that particular technology is just totally dead. So yeah, and so yes, a DMP by definition would have to perhaps become some sort of technology that would allow a marketer or an agency to manage and segment audiences across multiple clean rooms. But the big difference is those clean rooms don't necessarily talk to each other. Like for instance, you know, ads Data Hub and Amazon Marketing Cloud don't talk to each other. They're not supposed to. They'll never talk to each other. And so there'll just be that difference that you won't necessarily have apples to apples audiences across data clean rooms, but you could certainly have a technology in the middle that just says, hey,
okay, I was going to say, is there a way
these...
to plug things in like the Trade Desk or Media Math and then just understand that this is Amazon, whatever cloud data, and we're targeting in markets for new plastic bottles or whatever.
Well,
oh wait, it would be metal bottles to remain sustainable. Sorry guys. Would it be that you think it's might move into that? Because I do think that I'm a big fan of the open exchange for many reasons, and I've received also hate mails for that, but I do think that is going to become like a lower percentage of the programmatic buys on the OMP, open marketplace, and then a lot more direct private deals, tech related deals, like advanced contextual via, I don't know, a live intent or something. And it's not going to become as programmatic as we think, even though the buy is still programmatic, the setup would be more on the one-on-one or direct. So do you think data clean rooms is going to be more accessible for like smaller to medium-sized brands? Like can a data room just be like, just attract, like, can one data room have a few of those smaller brands in it?
So
is that possible? Then it will be possible. DMP, right? I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. So there's nothing really preventing say an ad tech or a MarTech company. So a data clean room itself is fairly like complex and arcane piece of technology, and it kind of has to be in order to allow you to work on data without touching the data. Like that's a complex thing to set up. But there's nothing really preventing an ad tech or a MarTech company from building some sort of productivity layer above that to make it easier to work with, or to make it easier to work with multiple data clean rooms at once. So I fully expect that we'll see that, and like it won't recreate the open exchange, because I don't think
so too.
Yeah, once third-party cookies die, a lot of that stuff is just kind of dead. I think it worked well for 15, 20 years, but it's had its moment. But there's no reason that you couldn't build a technology that would allow you to work with multiple data clean rooms directly, and then potentially, yes, integrate directly into something like the Trade Desk so that you don't have to take extra steps. I mean, that's one reason there's so many companies on the Lumascape, is because a lot of those companies exist as these productivity layers or these middleware layers to say, oh, well, you want to do X, Y, and Z, but you don't have the expertise or the staff or the budget to work with technology X, Y, and Z. Well, we'll build technology A, we'll integrate with all three, and you just pay us a much lower fee than what you would pay to work with all those technologies directly. So yeah, I think it's totally possible. And yes, I think it'll take time. It will take time, and a technology like that might be sort of the next evolution of what a DMP is.
That's a good segue into somebody asked this question, and I want to make sure I ask it. So how do clean rooms vary from DMP or data lake?
So
I don't know what data lake is.
I can try to answer this. So a DMP, Allison, I think I already kind of talked about DMP after you asked the question. So like DMP, just the classic definition is that you're managing multiple third-party audience segments from a central piece of software, essentially. And the beauty is that those third-party audience segments can kind of all talk to each other. because that's the beauty of third-party cookies. So you can implement global frequency caps and global audience suppression rules and things like that, which you're just not going to be able to do that in data clean room world necessarily. You're not going to be able to have a frequency cap in Ads Data Hub that talks to a frequency cap in Amazon Marketing Cloud. They're just not going to talk to each other in that way. So that's DMP. So that's kind of how DMP would vary versus data clean room. Data lake is essentially just a method of storing kind of raw data sets in the cloud, for lack of a better term. And so a data lake, I'm just trying to think, it would be separate from a data clean room.
Yeah.
Usually you probably would not plug a data lake directly into a data clean room. The reason being that a data lake, essentially data lakes, one of the things about data lakes is data in a data lake is not super well organized, for lack of a better term. I'm struggling to think of technical or non-technical terms to explain this, but a data lake, the data just isn't super well organized, and that's part of the principle of a data lake. But a data clean room needs data to be very well organized because it's got such complex rules. It needs the data going into or out of a data clean room needs to adhere to a very strict set of schemas, whereas a data lake doesn't have a strict set of schemas. So I don't know, Allison, hopefully that help explain a little bit sort of the differences between these things. And if you have other questions, or I did a bad job explaining it, let me know. It's a good question.
All right, Myles, leave us with a
thanks,
word.
Allison. Thank you.
Word of wisdom.
A word of wisdom?
Yeah, what is something you now know that you wish you knew, maybe when you first started in your ad tech journey? What is some wisdom you've learned over the
I was
years?
actually just talking to my wife about this yesterday. Is the degree to which so I've always worked in the advertising marketing industry. I assume this is probably true in other industries, but I only have one vantage point, is that the people, the leadership at various companies, senior leadership, I mean the people at the very top, are operating from just as limited sets of information as all of us on this call.
Yeah, and more sometimes.
Yes, sometimes more. And that is, I wish I had really known that a long time ago. And it's only been in the last couple of years that I've really learned that and grown to appreciate that and kind of experienced it directly. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's not a problem. It's nothing for anybody to be ashamed of. It's not some smoking gun. It's just true. Yeah. We're all operating from very limited sets of information, and we're all hunting for sort of the truth and reliable information and someone to tell us what to do, and someone to reassure us that we're doing the right thing. And so that's my big lesson that I've learned.
Well, that's some wise words. You probably just saved somebody's job by now. You gotta remain diplomatic from a client perspective, but internally too, you're the expert. A lot of us are here because we're the only expert on our team, and we don't get to, we have a lot of pressure to deliver. Yeah. And we are not allowed to make mistakes, which is cray. So thank you for reminding us that.
The curse of competence is what that is.
Boom, really. Myles, thank you so much for dropping by, everybody on the call.
Thanks for having me.
in the community. Myles will be back with Shiv actually on a call, I think sometime in April. And next week we might have Shiv on the call. So I'll keep everybody and confirm everything with everyone. Myles' information, I dropped it in our Slack channel. It will also be in the description of this video on YouTube whenever I publish in a month from now. And so connect with Myles. They're a great resource. U of Digital also has a course, and they have identity specific, what is it, a module, a chapter on identity and what to do with it. Strongly recommend their content. It's phenomenal. And also they have a free version of the newsletter that they're giving us access to, but I think everyone can pretty much access that newsletter. The newsletter is good because it recaps like the top trends in the last week, and it just gives you like a good tweet, digestible, like this is what's happening in the last 10 articles you may have missed. It's a great way to stay on top of the industry and what the heck is happening. So check out this newsletter. If you're interested, I'll drop in the Slack again. Give me a few so I can find the link again in my email. And then connect with Myles, connect with Shiv, follow them on LinkedIn. They're a great resource. We need people like them to remind us that there's something bigger outside and we need to be aware of it. Okay.
You're
They
too
make it
kind,
easy
Ellen.
on us, you know. So why not? Okay. Cool.
Well, yeah, thank you, Ellen, for having
Everybody's
me. And
good.
thanks,
Okay, cool.
everybody.